Namaste. My name is Michel Danino. I am speaking from IIT Gandhinagar, and I have been invited by Think India platform to speak on a topic close to my heart, which is how can ancient India help today's India? It's a topic which I have addressed on several platforms, but I'm going to do it differently today and kind of try to distill my thoughts on this. What I would like to address is basically the following, that we need in India to decide whether Indian culture, heritage, whatever we put under this category. I use here in IIT Gandhinagar, I often use the term Indian knowledge systems. But anyway, we'll define this a little more precisely later in this talk. Whether they have any relevance to today's India and basically to today's world. And we need to decide this point. Either they do not, and in that case, we have to take stock and understand that if that is the case, they are relevant only to scholars interested in studying the past or maybe museums. So basically, these Indian knowledge traditions will get museified, as the term goes. And then we have to simply, put them behind and not be sentimentally attached to them, and look for modern solutions to modern problems. So this is one question which faces us. If that is not the case, if we find that some of them have relevance, some of those traditions have relevance, we have to also assess which ones do, which ones don't, and those that do have relevance, to what extent, in what ways. So these are some of the issues that I want to address. But there is, first of all, a big paradox in India that we need to address. This is what I call the paradox of India as a knowledge civilization. And the paradox goes like this, that we find that ancient India, classical India, if you wish, all these terms I keep a little undefined and imprecise because that's not our concern today. But classical India greatly valued knowledge. It valued knowledge to the point that it deified knowledge. It turned knowledge into a goddess Saraswati in that case. It also has a huge amount of writings, texts that deify or let us say revere knowledge as the instrument of self-fulfillment, of liberation. There is this famous Sanskrit saying, Savidya ya vimuktaye, which means that knowledge which liberates, or maybe knowledge is that which liberates. So knowledge is something given the greatest importance among perhaps many other ancient civilizations, though the Greek civilization also had gave central place to knowledge. But then, so this is on the one hand. On the other hand, we find that independent India has, as it appears, no use at all for the accumulated classical knowledge of India. And if we look at the scene of independent India, 1947, 15 August, trying to create a new India, which is what all freedom fighters told us that they wanted to do, we find that they take over British polity, political systems, governance, the judicial system, the penitentiary system, the economic system, the education system. All of it is whatever administrative system, political system, and so on. All of it is what the British machinery, the colonial machinery, had put in place. For good or bad, we are not going to discuss this. Doesn't matter. But we find that there is almost no attempt to reconsider what a new country, which starts almost with a blank slate, or at least has that opportunity of starting on a blank slate, how it could have used these knowledge traditions, which is something that earlier thinkers, like let us say, a whole range of thinkers from Swami Vivekananda to Sri Aurobindo, most of the freedom fighters had expected a new independent India to do. So there is a great paradox. There's a second paradox, which is that when you study, which is what I have tried to do in my own small way, when you study those knowledge traditions of classical India, ancient India, you are confronted in the current intellectual world and atmosphere, including the academic world in which I have one foot, you are confronted with two very extreme attitudes. One is what I call the glorifier. So the glorifier is someone who has a kind of a blind faith in Indian knowledge traditions, considers that India knew everything worth knowing, and was, in terms of knowledge, the most advanced civilization of all, and so on and so forth. So the glorifier imagines a golden age of in ancient India, where pretty much everything that needed to be known was known, including sometimes aeronautics and genetic manipulations. And if you go all the way, you can find even quantum physics and relativity and whatnot. So this is one extreme. And obviously, this is not a very useful attitude because it is actually not rooted in knowledge. And those voices are from people who have not taken the trouble of studying those knowledge traditions. And therefore, they have no new fresh approach to contribute. And they cannot tell us in what way those knowledge traditions could be of use, of application to India's current problems or the world's problems. On the other hand, at the other extreme, you have what I call the negationists. So, there are, of course, all kinds of nuances within those categories, but they are identifiable and you do meet them, you do encounter them, you do read them, you do hear them. And actually, those two extremes are the noisiest categories and activists which you can encounter usually in the media, especially. So the negationists are those who basically consider that there is no value except, as I said at the beginning, maybe a value of, a museum artifact, but otherwise there is no value and there's no time to be wasted on studying Indian knowledge traditions, Indian knowledge systems. And therefore, if you do mathematics, well, you do just modern mathematics. There's no point trying to study anything ancient. Maybe Greek sometimes and Chinese, but not Indian in any case. If you study civil engineering, you don't need to refer to any past achievement in civil engineering in India. If you study political science, you better start with the European concept of a nation state. If you study psychology, well, you have a lot of Western psychologists and psychoanalysts, and all of that is basically enough, and all of that is basically 99% of what constitutes Indian academics. So there is no effort apart from a few individual courses here and there, apart from a few initiatives, there is no systematic effort to explore the knowledge traditions and give them a place, which is, again, a great paradox or a great irony, considering that, for example, if you move to Europe, you will find that they do try to preserve and document and sometimes exploit their classical knowledge, whatever it was. So we are caught in this paradox. Of course, between the glorifiers and the negationists, you have a whole range of people and generally very sound scholars who do their work quietly, who do not have easy access to the media, who do not have also easy access to the policymakers, as a result of which we have, for example, in India, and I don't want to talk politics, but I have to note that we have in India now a party in power for the past 6 years, which claims to be interested in Indian culture and to promote it, but has done absolutely nothing worth noting to have an intelligent exploration, intelligent exposure of those knowledge traditions. So in a way, that attitude also reinforces the implicit statement that those traditions have no relevance to the present world. So with this introduction, what do we do? How do we take a kind of a middle road where, of course, we will not claim that each and every bit of Indian exploration in every discipline, and God knows that there were multiple complex, rich explorations in possibly every single field of human intellectual activity. We will not claim that all of these are worth studying in detail or worth trying to apply to present situations, but nevertheless, there are a few very obvious fields, obvious branches of knowledge, obvious techniques which have been developed on this land and which I will briefly mention before I will try to take this debate to a slightly higher level. So one is very often mentioned by scholars, and actually Western scholars as much, if not more, than Indian scholars, and that is the whole field of India, our relationship as human beings with nature. What do we understand by nature? And given the Judeo-Christian tradition which has dominated the Western approach, in which nature was created for humans, for man, in fact, because it is man in Genesis. If you read Genesis again in the Bible, all plants and animals were created to be at the service of humanity. So that is one attitude. But the Indian attitude has been extremely different, and it has started from a spiritual concept that this whole universe, this whole world, everything is essentially divine, is essentially the Brahman, or whatever you wish to call it, and therefore nature is part of this divine manifestation. We are part of it, and therefore it needs to be considered as sacred and respected. And this gave rise to actually quite a lot of actual practices in which you can see reflected in Ashoka's edicts. You can see them reflected in Kautilya Arthashastra about preserving nature, creating wildlife sanctuaries, taking care of angel animals, and so on and so forth. And also a whole branch of Vriksha Ayurveda, which is to say Ayurveda for plants, which was developed to take care of disease, plants and trees, but also to promote agriculture and crops and so on. So there is a whole knowledge there, much of which is still being tested, is applicable, and but this is intimately related to lifestyle ultimately. And this whole approach to nature is simply summed up in our taking from nature what we need, but not more than what we need. It is as simple as that. You have a lot of texts. I'm amplifying this. There is one Subhashita, for example, saying that you may have 100 rooms in your house, but you will use only one or two. You may have 100 beds, but you will sleep only on one cot. You may have 100 dishes, but you can only eat one or two. And basically, what you really own is what you can really use. All the rest does not belong to you. This is one beautiful Subhashita, which and there are many more which we can quote, which explains how we are not meant and not supposed to exploit nature. We can just take its fruit, whatever it wants to give us, and this will be sufficient. So there is a whole lifestyle lesson here, which maybe some of us under the coronavirus crisis have started rethinking, and we have been, brought back to what is more essential in life and what really matters. And I think that I've heard of a few voices here and there in India, in Europe, not much in America, but there might be a few, saying that we have to realize what we're doing as a human species. And it's not only the well-documented destruction of nature or alteration of the climate, but this mad race towards overconsumption, which actually takes us right into economics and the whole economic model, the whole question of the economic model, where classical India has still a lot to say. This was pointed out actually by a few Indian thinkers, but notably by the German come British economist Ernst Schumacher, who wrote this well-acclaimed book, Small is Beautiful, in which his central point was extremely simple. He said, and he called it Buddhist economics, though the term is not so important, but he said that our whole model of economy is going the wrong way, and we are going to hit a wall at some point for the simple reason that we have made the mistake of placing consumption at the center. And consumption cannot be a viable, sustainable. He was one of those who pioneered the terms sustainable and sustainability, which today, 50 years later, since he wrote in the 1970s, we use almost every day. And he said our model is not sustainable because we have made the mistake of putting consumption at the center, and therefore the creation of artificial needs, of unnecessary products, and the fast depletion of the planet's resources for no purpose whatsoever. So what he said was, put the human being back in the center and look at what the human being really needs, really wants, and you will develop a whole different economic system, which, for example, will rely much more on local solution, local resources, rather than, finding in Chennai an apple flown from all the way from California and things like that. So here, and he did work in Burma, Schumacher in Burma, a little bit in India, if I remember right, was inspired by those semi-traditional economies that he saw in those countries. So here there is a lesson which, of course, a lot of ecological thinkers, environmental thinkers have come to on their own, even without any reference to the Indian traditions. But why don't we in India look back and see what essential lessons we can draw from this to address this perennial problem of growth. Growth, yes, there has to be some growth in the sense that everybody has to be raised to a certain decent standard of living, but not mindless growth in the sense that we have to produce at any cost all kinds of artificial products that we don't actually need. This is not something viable, and this is certainly one lesson we can learn from ancient India. Is all over the text and the whole philosophy of life and how life is to be lived. So this is one major field to which we have to immediately append fields like agriculture and water conservation. So today, of course, organic farming has come back in fashion, though we still continue chemical-based agriculture in a very big way. Organic farming is actually what sustained millions and sometimes hundreds of millions of Indians for something like 7,000 years, or even if you want to go back to the origins of agriculture, it could be 8 or 9,000 years in India. It has worked. It has worked. We are told that it cannot produce sufficiently for 1.3 billion people, but some people disagree and have proved by field trials that a kind of improved, streamlined traditional farming, not totally what was done 1,000 years ago, but something which can be improved by a little bit of mechanization, small machines that can help produce, biofertilizers, pesticides, can actually produce the same yields as chemical-based agriculture. So there's a major question here, which at least Indian policymakers should have addressed, instead of going blindly the other way and not even giving a fair chance to an alternative solution. We will be forced to address this question because, again, chemical-based agriculture is not sustainable in the long run. So this is one field which, and water management goes with agriculture. There is a huge number of extremely efficient local solutions to water management, which ancient and classical India devised, and which are well documented. We have a lot of texts again, we have a lot of archaeological evidence, we have a lot of living testimonies of some of these surviving water structures, and they all have the advantage, immense advantage, of solving local problems with local solutions. In Gujarat, we depend on Narmada water, which has to come from hundreds of kilometers far through huge pipelines. Whether this is sustainable in the long term is a big question mark. So luckily here there has been at least some awakening among our policymakers, our administrative systems, and there have been some attempts, but still not on the required scale to make use of those solutions. But they have to be addressed much more rigorously. There are many other fields I could quote. Let me just deal with one or two before I come to something more central. One is obviously medicine. And we do have quite a few traditional systems in India. Ayurveda is the best known, but there is also Unani, there is Siddha medicine in South India, and there are a few more. Ayurveda, to take that alone, is back in fashion. And if you conduct a simple survey of people who take Ayurvedic treatment, you will find a very high degree of satisfaction. And of course, here we have modern scientific medicine claiming that Ayurveda can only alleviate or maybe do some prophylactic treatment, relieve some symptoms, relieve some pain, but cannot really address serious diseases. Ayurvedic practitioners disagree, and they do have cases to show of sometimes grave diseases that have been cured through Ayurveda. So here there is an attempt in India. Yes, we have the Ayush department, which addresses a number of these traditional techniques, which is trying to give a place to Ayurveda, but again, in a way which is not in consonance with the spirit of Ayurveda. For example, our Ayurvedic colleges are patterned on the modern medical colleges. They are not at all suited to the real Ayurvedic knowledge tradition. And therefore, there is a huge problem, first of all, of pedagogy. And the Ayurvedic practitioners whom we produce are usually not confident in their skills, not confident that Ayurveda can address diseases on its own. And Ayurveda is, of course, much more than a curative system. It is also a whole lifestyle system. It deals a lot with diet. It deals with the environment. It deals with your inner being. It deals with all of that. It is a holistic system. It does deserve the term of holistic. So there is much more than should have been done to give Ayurveda a central place, a sustainable place in the Indian medical system. Let me briefly mention architecture, because we've been after especially globalization and the so-called liberalization, whether it liberates or not is a big question, but I will not go into it. We have seen mushroomings of urban structures, urban areas at an incredible pace, and most of it is not only architecturally very unsatisfying. We have seen, all of us, these huge centrally air-conditioned buildings with all windows closed and a total barrier with the environment. Here there has been a very great poverty of mind in using the very significant traditions of architecture in India, which have addressed those questions of how do you relate to the environment, how do you create a living space that is in harmony with the human being. There has been a total departure, and though of course there have been individual attempts here and there, altogether this is an area where we have totally failed to reflect upon these knowledge traditions in architecture, which have been extremely elaborate in classical India. And we are proud of our monuments. We expect millions of tourists to come from abroad to visit them. But basically, again, they are pieces of museum. They are not something that we would consider, reflecting upon as giving us ideas that we could use. There are exceptions. For example, the campus from which I speak, the campus of IIT Gandhinagar, did try to use a number of features of classical architecture of Ahmedabad urban localities, and to great success. So if it can be done, in such a case, it can be done in many more cases, but there has been a poverty of imagination in this field. Let me come now with 2 or 3 important areas which are of relevance to our national life. One is religious harmony. We've been suffering in India, no doubt, of inter-religious frictions, to put it simply. And this is something which was addressed long ago. It was addressed in many ways, but it was addressed explicitly by somebody called Ashoka, who wrote an edict, I think it is edict number 12, where he gave the recipe for inter-religious harmony. And his recipe is extremely simple. He said, number 1, don't praise your religion too highly. If you have a religion, you practice it, but you don't speak about it, you don't praise it too much. In other words, don't be a fanatic. Don't consider that your religion is the only one. He insists that you should study other religions, the good doctrines, he says, of other religions, and basically there should be a constant dialogue among different religions. Of course, in his days, religions means the different sects at work in India, including, of course, what goes truly by the name of Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, and a number of now vanished sects which existed in his time. So perhaps the problem was simpler, but nevertheless, I believe that his solution still holds, provided we keep in mind his insistence that we should not be fanatics, we should not hold on whatever we have chosen, if at all we want to choose a religion, as the ultimate or the only one. So this would rule out, for example, proselytism. Of course, it would not rule out making the knowledge available to whoever is interested, but it would rule out active proselytism of a kind that we have been all too familiar with. So this is one debate which needs fresh reflection, and I think that we will be more and more driven towards it. This takes me to the important question of secularism. Why did we have to use this term is something that the Constituent Assembly addressed towards the end of 1949, before the Constitution was promulgated in January 1950. And there was a long debate actually on whether the word secularism should be used or not. And you may be surprised to know that the decision was that it will not be used. And the original Constitution of India does not carry the word secularism at all. It was parachuted much, much later, but in 1974 or 75 during the emergency. But that's another issue. Well, first of all, why did we need this concept of secularism, which is a European concept, which is the separation of church and state in Western Europe, or Islam and state in Turkey? Why do we need this at all when there was never an attempt, or so rarely that it's not even worth considering, an attempt in India to place religion as an instrument of political power? Ashoka, again, to take his case, could have tried to impose Buddhism as a state religion. We know that he was taken by the Buddha's doctrine. He was fascinated. He had a change of heart. Some people say conversion, though I do not think this term is appropriate in his time. But anyway, he never tried, nevertheless, to impose Buddhism as a religion on holy subjects. This concept is completely alien to the Indian ethos. Kings which, Jain kings like Kharavela, for example, also never thought of imposing Jainism, and so on and so forth. So in such a context, where was the need of importing an ill-digested, unsuited concept of secularism without even defining it? It's not even defined in the Constitution. This is something that we need to reflect upon, because we are using this word secularism as a kind of a cover for all kinds of meanings which actually the concept of secularism is not supposed to carry. So we say equidistance from all religions, we say neutrality towards all religions, but this is not what secularism is about. So we have gone astray, we have thrown in a lot of confusion, there's been a lot of hypocrisy, who is going to be more secular than others, and so on. And this has not helped the public debate on secularism. In my suggestion, we should go back to how India has viewed the relationship between the political power and religion. And it has viewed it in a very simple way, which is that in India, we've had this concept of swabhava and swadharma. Swabhava is one's individual nature, and swadharma is therefore the fact that all of us have a different path suited to our own nature. It has to be custom-made. Religion has to be custom-made. Spirituality has to be custom-made. It cannot be one path for all. And therefore, there is an automatic acceptance of the other as, at least at the level of religion and spirituality. The social level is much more complex and it's a different question altogether. But at the level of, let us say, belief systems, thought systems, there has never been a desire to impose one for all. It's not possible. It's not regarded as being feasible. So in Jainism also this anekantavada concept is very strong, which is again that anekanta, there cannot be one path or one explanation of one truth. So these are important concepts which should have oriented our debate on secularism, but failed to do so. Let me now come finally to three important areas. One is education. There would be so much to say on this, the fact that we can preserve the British education system, maybe in fact making it worse and worse instead of improving upon it. It has become more and more stifling at all levels of the educational system. It has, when in fact in Europe, educational systems were improved upon in the sense of trying to more and more stimulate the creativity of the student. In India, it has been the other way. The ancient view of education is quite simply that we are made of different parts. And we are not just an intellect that needs to be trained. We are made of many parts, including an inner being, all the way to a physical being. And all these parts need different tools to be properly educated. So you will find in the literature, therefore, different methods to educate those different parts. If you study the whole curriculum of what was taught, for example, at Nalanda University, to take a very simple case, but it was the same more or less in humble gurukulams and in other institutions that India kept creating in the course of time. You find that the intellect was very much addressed. There were a number of rigorous disciplines, including debating, the art of argument building, of engaging in argumentation with the adversary. All of these skills were highly developed intellectual skills, but at the same time, the inner being also was addressed through a number of doctrines, tools, meditation, yoga. There's no time to go into the details, but this is well documented. We've dumped that second part. We've also dumped, in fact, the physical part. It's only now that it is coming back to some small extent, but classical India gave a tremendous importance to the development of the physical body through all kinds of games and techniques of wrestling, again, yoga to some extent, and so on and so forth. So this was the martial arts, of course. This was very important, and it was intended to produce human beings that had an integral development and not a narrow intellectual line, especially not in a single small discipline. So this is something that we have to think over. Of course, many educationists have been again and again insisting on the fact that we need to create holistic development of the student, but then we are not drawing sufficient inspiration from what the systems developed in classical times. So I think we also can draw inspiration in that field. Ethics, finally, ethics is something that is of great impact in our daily lives. Ethics can be to some extent disconnected from a background of religion or spirituality, because we can simply take some simple guiding principles. For example, that in classical India, life is seen as a sacrifice. It's not seen as something to be selfishly enjoyed. We have always to sacrifice something so that others can benefit. Others may be the family, others may be the community, others may be the whole nation, the whole society, or the whole humanity even. So this concept of giving back, giving constantly, is something at the center of Indian ethics, and I think it has immense relevance today. If we look at those stories emanating from the heroes during this coronavirus pandemic crisis, there are so many inspiring stories in India, also abroad. I've seen a few of people went totally out of their way at great personal risk to help others. And this is something that India has cultivated particularly, and with a lot of examples through Indian history and texts to that extent. There's another concept I want to insist upon for a couple of minutes, which is the concept of nishkama karma. Nishkama karma, or desireless action and work, is of crucial importance to me because it destroys the twin concept of success and failure that Western ethics has so much insisted upon, especially US concept of ethics where you have winners and losers. You must succeed. Life is meant to succeed at any cost. This is something that Nishkama Karma destroys. There is no success, there is no failure. There is only striving, there is only your effort, and the fruits do not belong to you. The fruits may be better off with the failure than a success. This is not for you to judge, this is not for you to decide. So this is something which has guided my own life, and I know the life of many, and it has immense value, and we are not using those tools, we are not exploiting them in our daily lives, and that is a great pity. So I think that this is something we need to revisit. Finally, I would close with a simple concept that we've been, all hearing about all the time in post-independent India, and that is national integration. So yes, we've been told that India has to be one nation, and this national integration is supposed to be a tool, but we have no idea how to actually feed that national integration. I conducted some simple tests years ago as part of an educational survey, and I found, for example, that the average Indian student in a given state is totally unable to cite even one major literary figure of the neighboring state. If you ask a Tamil student, tell me one major poet of Malayalam language or Telugu language, they would never be able to answer. Even in their own language, they might be able to cite a name or two or three, but they will not know much of what they actually wrote. So there is a major failure of the educational system in using the cultural wealth of India, of all the linguistic regions, the geographical regions, the cultural spheres of India, and integrating them in the educational system to give that sense of a pan-Indian culture. A pan-Indian culture which was certainly all India, which was certainly one, but which was also many. There's no question, of course, of imposing a singular mode of thought on all of India. Indian culture always respected diversity. It did more than respect diversity. It promoted diversity. It celebrated diversity. And this is something we have failed to realize, to what extent Indian culture is one and many at the same time. Even though, all our great thinkers, take Tagore, for example, have been emphatic about it. Nevertheless, we have been too shy, timorous in using that wealth in an intelligent fashion that would be inspiring for students, not, of course, something a new load, a new burden on them, which they would eventually resent. So my conclusion is quite simple. There's a tremendous wealth out there. It's a wealth of knowledge in all fields, many of which would still be relevant to the problems which humanity is going to confront more and more. And there are problems of this whole direction that humanity has taken in the post, industrial revolution world. And what Indian knowledge systems are saying is that this direction is wrong. It cannot go on forever. It is not sustainable, if I may use Schumacher's term. And there are alternatives. And of course, a lot of Western thinkers, especially as I said at the beginning, environmental thinkers, have tried to formulate these alternatives. And if you read them, you see that they come so close to the Indian classical modes of thinking about life and what we are expected to do with human life and how we are supposed to live as a society. They come so close to it, and sometimes they knowingly come close to it, but sometimes unknowingly too. It doesn't matter. So we have failed as a nation to make intelligent use, which is neither glorification, absolutely useless, hollow, counterproductive, nor sterile negationism of the kind that still pervades our academic world. There's a whole agenda in front of us. Maybe we can take advantage of crises like the coronavirus crisis and more crises that are yet to come, necessarily have to come. They are unavoidable, and we should not regard them as catastrophes, but we should regard them essentially as opportunities to rethink. Thank you very much. So should I take questions? If let me see if I can identify this comment. Sure. How do I?
You scrolled it this way.
Excuse me, I'm not very familiar with this medium. I will now see if I can identify some questions which I can use. For example, I see a comment here, which is that one of the most important skills we have to develop is the ability to sit with discomfort. Why not sit with comfort? There is no need to take it as an example of, as a case of discomfort. We can sit comfortably, whether at home or in our place of work or wherever it may be. And we have to, I think one great lesson of this present, lockdown, and this is something which has been experienced in many other countries too, has been that some people have taken it extremely well, and they have used their time fruitfully, creatively. They have done things which they were dreaming of doing all the time, reading books and so on, which they couldn't do, whatever it was. But others have become depressed, have become violent sometimes, and this shows a complete failure in being able to live with oneself, which is again one essential lesson of ancient India. You have to discover yourself and be at home with yourself. So this is something which I think we have to learn from this present crisis. I will scroll down and see whether there is any question. I can see some comments. Good evening. Somebody asked, can we ask questions also? Yes, why not? If you can write in your chat. And I do not see too many questions. If you can help me, I have some friends here of Think India. If they can.
So this is one comment.
One comment. Please show me on this. This will be very good. Indian classical knowledge is often seen through the prism of religion, leading to a distortion of its essence and making it unavailable for the present day. Can you please shed some light on the difference between religion and dharma? Well, the difference, first of all, is that religion is an English word and dharma is a Sanskrit word. That's actually the whole difference. Dharma is not religion. Dharma initially is the cosmic order. What sustains dha is what bears up, what carries. So dharma is what carries the universe and carries us. And therefore dharma can be ethics, it can be truth, it can be this cosmic order, it can also be religion as a narrowed application, but it is not religion. And it's a great pity that in Hindi in particular, dharma has come to mean religion. That's a big confusion. Dharma in the Sanskrit classical literature is so much more than that. So you're right. If we identify Indian knowledge traditions with religion, then we are in trouble. because they are much bigger than religion. They do integrate a lot of belief systems, thought systems, but not religion in the narrow sense that this English word carries. Any other?
One question is there. Akash.
Which one?
This one. Akash.
My question is, can the Mahabharata be regarded as historical evidence, as we have seen archaeologists like Bibi Lal, who excavated the sites of Hastinapura and Indraprastha and claimed that the battle occurred around 800 BC? Look, this is a problem for archaeologists or scholars to solve. Why do you worry about it? Mahabharata is much greater than archaeology. Whether Mahabharata can be shown by archaeology to have happened or not, and yes, Professor Bibi Lal, who will be 99 years old in 3 days, I think, you can all wish him the opening of his centenary year. This will be on May 2nd. Professor Bibi Lal did present cogent arguments as to why certain number of sites can be associated with the epic, just as some other sites with the Ramayana, and therefore seems to build up to some archaeological justification for the historical truth of the story. But other archaeologists do not agree. And these arguments go on. So these are scholarly arguments. They are not central to what Mahabharata has carried as a message and has done for India. Mahabharata and Ramayana together, almost you might say, created India, integrated India in an extraordinary fashion. There's no time to develop this, but I think that this is a scholarly debate which should not be mixed with the importance of the message that these two important texts carry. And whether the epic are historical or not does not matter for as far as their message is concerned. So this is something which I think is often the point is often missed, and some enthusiasts consider that it's absolutely vital to demonstrate the historicity of these two epics, which is a difficult task to do. I mean, as I said, there are lots of scholarly arguments in favor of historicity. There are also some against historicity. To my mind, it doesn't matter. It's a minor debate for the scholars. If you want to get involved, you can, but you have to study the whole background of this scholarly debate. And there's 200 years of background, not just Professor Bibi Lal. But that is a debate in itself. It doesn't matter for as far as the two epics are concerned.
Question. Gaurav.
Have you been through Bhrigu Samhita? Can you briefly throw light on its essence and exploring life and its dynamics? No, not really. I have heard of Bhrigu Samhita only as essentially a collection of astrology-based predictions, which are supposed to apply to every possible human being on Earth. I do not know much more than this. I have heard extraordinary stories of people whose past and future were documented by Bhrigu Samhita, but I do not have first-hand experience of it, and I have not read the text, so therefore I would prefer not to say more about this. We say the zero, decimal, algebra, trigonometry, number system were invented in India. Is it accepted all over the world in the history of mathematics, or are we just admiring ourselves? Okay, so yes, there is a good deal of mathematics which was created in India, no doubt. Those areas which you quote are largely Indian contributions, not exclusively. Algebra also has contributions from other systems of mathematics. There's a good deal of Greek algebra, there's a good deal of Chinese algebra, so it's not exclusively Indian. Trigonometry also has major Indian contributions, but not exclusively. So number system, yes, the decimal-based number system, which the whole world is using today, is definitely of Indian origin. Most of this is well accepted now by sound historians of mathematics. There is not much controversy about it. The whole difficulty is now to, again, remind our students in India that these contributions are from India. And there, it is not enough to say, we invented the zero, which actually is not a very good statement. There's no time to explain why, but we did not invent the zero. We invented the zero as a number in the decimal system. That's different. So just turning those statements into snippets is to me useless. If you want young Indians, for example, to be aware of all of this, you have to explain these concepts and show them the text and show them how they were arrived at and what they did with these concepts and basically the whole development of them. So this is something that still remains to be done. There have been a few attempts in the educational world. I have contributed to one or two of them, but we are still very far from a satisfactory exposure to these knowledge systems. Any other?
From cost of this party.
Yes. So the present generation is alien to the universal, principles, Tattvam Asi, Brahma Vidya, etc., given in the Upanishads. Unfortunately, we have bracketed them under religion, but in contrast, they are inquiry of the self. Yes, that's quite correct. How can we reach out to the present generation and what is the relevance of these principles to the modern world? You know, the relevance is quite simply a perennial relevance. It is simply the question that human beings always ask themselves at some point or the other, who am I? What am I doing in this world? And this is something that you cannot, unless you turn human beings into absolute machines. Our present civilization is trying to do that, but not succeeding yet. Unless human beings are always going to ask these questions. And therefore, these great inquiries into self-knowledge, which the Upanishads and a lot of other Indian texts and other Indian systems of thought have delved upon, are of great importance. They are not religion. They are partly philosophy. They are partly spirituality. Again, our English-based categories are not very good. They are basically about self-knowledge. And yes, I consider that they are eminently relevant. We should be exposed to them in a way that leaves us completely free to take, it's like a thali. You have so many dishes there on the thali. You should be free to take what you are drawn to, what you feel is going to give you food, the real food that will feed your being. So again, there is a failure of the educational system. There is some timid attempt to try to remedy that. We will see whether it succeeds or not. I see another one here. In today's times, westernization in India is spontaneous. We can try preserving the culture, but this will only maybe decrease the rate of that. I'm not sure what you mean. What are your thoughts and opinions regarding this? I think you are trying to debate this westernization versus Indian culture conflict. Personally, I'm not afraid of westernization. I do consider that Indians need to be properly, intelligently, impartially exposed to the best of Indian culture. But we must remember that Indian civilization was always in touch with other civilizations. It was in touch with the Chinese, it was in touch with the Greek to a limited extent, it was in touch with the Mesopotamian, it was in touch with the Southeast Asia, all the way to Japan. So it's not as if we should shut down India and keep westernization out. In fact, westernization is going to operate a very good screening of what is worth preserving, because of what westernization confronts us with so much that is blatantly unsatisfactory, that we will be drawn to go back and look at what we would like to preserve and resuscitate, revivify in our lives. So I think this is the challenge that globalization, westernization is putting in front of us. It's up to us to take it in the right way. Someone is saying time that we remove the term, and this is a good friend of mine, Namaste Sriganji, time that we remove the term secular, which is alien to our dharma. Well, I briefly addressed this. I agree. It is secularism was a Western phenomenon, European phenomenon to be precise, in the 18th century, where Christianity in Europe and Islam in Turkey were holding directly or indirectly political power. This situation never occurred in India, and therefore there was no need to import, and also in a very, very imperfect way. But I do not want to proceed further. This would require a whole discussion in itself, which I did try to cover in a talk at IIT Madras. I think it is on YouTube. You can turn to it if you wish. Then, any other that you can identify? Interesting questions?
So you can suggest some
Among these? This is okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Please provide a reading list for us and comment on how India's knowledge systems approach psychology and mental health, and how we can use that knowledge for today's problem. All right, reading list. Yes, I can provide. I would advise that you watch the videos. We have now 3 years online of Indian knowledge systems videos, lectures contributed by scholars at IIT Gandhinagar, and there are other organizations in India that also have contributed usefully. So there's a lot of resource online. If you want a reading list, I think I have one ready. You can mail me and I will share it with you. This is a work in progress. And yes, it is important that we read sound books, sometimes classical books, sometimes the primary texts themselves, whether in the original, if you happen to know the original language, or else in good translations. So we have to keep this reading habit. Watching YouTube videos is very nice, but you know, it comes and goes. It will not stay as much as reading a solid book. So please write to me and I will do what I can. Please suggest some good reads for students to get acquainted with dharmic traditions of Bharat. So there again, I think it's a good project that we should start working on. I have a list myself, but I need to refine it, and then we can. In fact, I should ask all the scholars who have contributed to create their own list themselves, and then we can have a consolidated list. That's a very good idea. What, according to you, shall be the lucid way of promulgating Sanskrit in schools as more accepting, probably you mean more acceptable, and more interesting for the youth of our country? Well, you have said it, more interesting. That is the key. I personally do not believe in making Sanskrit compulsory, because most students will resent it. The whole interest in Sanskrit, the whole key to making Sanskrit interesting is the pedagogy, is, you know, making it something that is exciting to the student, living, not a dead set of, you know, rules which you have to swallow. Of course, you will have to learn the rules as you proceed, no doubt, but it should be seen through, you know, texts that carry thought, that carry a message, or that are simply delightful. There are so many such texts. So we still have, and some individual professors, lecturers have managed to do it. They have evolved their own pedagogy. But at the national level, if you look at the way Sanskrit is taught in through the regular education policy, it is not encouraging, and it is not something that students would you know, be drawn to. So this is one challenge, certainly. If we have to start a school which teaches only Indian traditional systems on various streams like consulting, politics, and Indian medicine and science, and then the sentence does not end. See, I'm not sure that there should be a school only with Indian traditional knowledge systems. I think that we can keep the disciplines as they are, at least in a first step. But we can integrate in all these disciplines. Say you teach mathematics. Well, integrate the part that comes from Indian mathematicians. You teach economics. Integrate some features from Kautilya Arthashastra, which are still relevant, and so on and so forth. So in every discipline, you can pull in that knowledge. If it is biology, well, you can explain the way maybe Ayurveda saw the functioning of the human body, and so on and so forth. So I think this is a huge challenge, and I have myself written a few papers and promoted a model for such an integration. But again, we need to have policymakers with a vision and with deeper concerns than simply singing the glory of a bygone past. So that is not happening yet. Let us see. Yes, more demands for a reading list. Excellent. What I will do, and this is a commitment which I make here, I have an academia.edu page on which there are a number of papers and a few educational modules. So if you access my page on academia.edu, I think I make a commitment that by the end of May, I have already several reading lists in different disciplines like science, for example. I can put up one immediately, Science and Technology in Ancient India. But for general culture and understanding the philosophical and spiritual traditions of India, I have something partially ready. I'll try to finalize it in consultation with scholars, and I will put it on my academia page. That will be the simplest. So this is my commitment. Somebody says, and how long can we go on? There's no limit. Right. Our school textbooks are full of everything under the sun attributed to Europeans and Americans. Let us say to the West, broadly speaking. From science to psychology, it seems like everything that our kids learn are borrowed from the West. What can be done to make a syllabus that is balanced? I am not saying that we need to pick up Ganesha and teach our kids about organ transplantation, but otherwise, how can we bring some balance? Well, by starting, you see, first of all, by doing it incrementally. It can only be a gradual process. We have been stuck with the more and more rigid, unchanging, stifling, and overburdened system of school education, where the average student, because of course there are a few exceptional schools here and there, naturally, but I'm talking about the average of the millions of students who go to the average school and who are never expected to think, never expected to raise their hands, never expected to ask a question, and never expected to learn anything beyond what the textbook repeats. So there is an urgent need to move away from this system. And as far as Indian knowledge traditions are concerned, actually, I was instrumental with a whole team of scholars under the direction of Professor Kapil Kapoor in designing a course called Knowledge Traditions and Practices of India for the CBSE. It was an elective core classes 11 and 12, and it dealt with pretty much any and every area of knowledge. And this course went on quite well for a few years, but then at a certain point, in fact, from 1914-15 onward, the CBSE lost interest and actually did not promote it in the way we had agreed. And therefore, the course is pretty much dormant. So this course was a good tool, but it was as a separate course, whereas my ideal would be that we slowly start integrating in the existing disciplines whatever relevant knowledge can be brought in. If, for example, you are discussing architecture, or it can be, of course, in higher education, in college level also, or you are discussing water management, or you are discussing environment, ecology, and so on, you bring in that part of the knowledge which is relevant. But then it will mean that the teachers themselves have to learn that to begin with. So you have to start with teacher training, which we had proposed to CBSE, but it didn't do it. So it has to be incremental. We have to be realistic, one step at a time, maybe one separate course as the course we had designed. And I'm willing to share the entire textbook in soft copy with anybody who asks me. In fact, I will also put it on my academia page by the end of May. So this is known as KTPI, Knowledge, Traditions and Practices of India for classes 11 and 12 CBSE, but that is a separate course. And the ideal is not that. The ideal is that all that knowledge is integrated in there. So we don't want, it's not that we want to condemn the Western knowledge, it's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with it, except maybe once in a while where you have, for example, cognitive science. Not all cognitive scientists, but some will tell you that consciousness is purely what the brain creates. So this is something which is completely at loggerheads with Indian knowledge traditions, where consciousness is much greater than the mind, much greater than the brain, much greater than our human body. So here and there will be conflicts which have to be presented as conflicts to the student and let the student decide. So we don't have to impose anything. We can show the different approaches. But very often, if you take, for example, ecology, which has been integrated at classroom level about 15 years ago in Indian schools, ecology is completely, environmental science at a basic level, of course, and there is nothing of Indian ecological traditions. Here there is no conflict. You can draw in the Indian ecological traditions. They don't conflict at all with environmental science. On the contrary, they support them. So you have to intelligently examine every field and decide what can be done in this field or that field. But for this, we need an enlightened set of policymakers. We don't have them as yet. Perhaps it will come eventually. There was a Sanskrit commission set up by the Modi government in 2015. No. The Sanskrit commission was set up long ago, ages ago. I forget the date, maybe in the 1960s. And you should read the report. It's extremely stimulating. It has provided excellent suggestions for promoting Sanskrit. I think you are referring to a language commission, whose chairman was again Professor Kapil Kapoor. And yes, it has made very good suggestions, not only for Sanskrit, for the development of all Indian languages, because all Indian languages deserve attention. You see, when a South Indian goes to North India, he said, you must learn Hindi. How can you not know Hindi? If you don't know Hindi, you will not know India. Very true. But, the average Indian of the Hindi belt will never be bothered learning Tamil or Malayalam or Telugu or Kannada. Why not? Why should not North Indians also learn one South Indian language? So this would not only promote national integration, but it would also expose that North Indian to a slightly different range of culture, and to understand what is common, what is different, what is new, etc. So the Language Commission, as far as I gathered, which was chaired by Professor Kapil Kapoor, has recommended the development and use of every single language and not just Sanskrit. But you are right that the government has not acted upon. And this is the problem with our policymakers: good intentions, low level of understanding of the real issues, and very often wrong advice by either group of, the two extreme groups which I commented upon at the start of my talk. Those I call the glorifiers and those I call the negationists. They are the ones who are usually heard by policymakers, not the sound scholars in between. Thank you for a lot of appreciation. I think we will, what is the time now? I do not wish to, we will, if some of you wish to mail me your questions, this can go on and on forever. I can try to address a few over email. Thank you for a lot of positive comments. I'm disappointed that I see no negative critical comment. I was hoping to have some that I could address. One last perhaps is that the CBSE textbook that I have mentioned is available for download from the from the NCERT website. Look for Knowledge, Traditions and Practices of India, available in 11 modules, but it's not 11 modules, sir. It is actually 22 or 24, and I think some of the links are dead. So anyway, true, you can access some from the CBSE or NCERT website, but I'm willing to share the two entire volumes, which I don't think CBSE will object to. I'll place them on my academia page for strictly non-commercial educational, self-educational purpose. I think this can be done. Yes, and okay, I think some of the questions repeat themselves. If you permit, I will take leave, and thank you very much for listening. I hope to have given you some food for thought, and I do hope that one day, eventually, we will understand the value of some, at least, of these knowledge traditions, and the part of them, I'm not saying that all of it is applicable and relevant to today's situations, but there's so much that is, and that we need to give much more attention to. Thank you very much. Namaste.